A man is walking his dogs. His pregnant partner is beside him. It's an ordinary evening in a quiet part of Merseyside. A cyclist pedals up behind them, calm, unhurried, like he's just another man out for an evening ride. Then he pulls out a revolver and shoots the dog walker twice in the back. As the man falls and lies dying in the street, the cyclist doesn't run. He doesn't panic. He simply walks over, stands above him, and fires 2 more shots into the back of his head from point-blank range. Then he gets back on his bike and pedals away. That wasn't his first murder. It wasn't even his most violent one. This is the story of Mark Fellows, the contract killer the British underworld came to know as the Iceman. Before any of this, Mark Fellows was, on paper, almost boring. Born in 1980, raised around Salford, later living in Warrington, he worked ordinary jobs. A stint as a sous chef, night shifts at a factory preparing sauces for supermarket ready meals. In his spare time, he was into fitness, running, cycling, long before a bicycle became the method he was infamous for. People who knew him at the time noticed something else, though. No matter what was happening around him, Fellows didn't react. No anger, no panic. Just a flat, unreadable calm. That's where the nickname came from, years before most of the country had ever heard it. The Iceman. He'd already had a brush with the law in his early 20s. Convicted in 2001, alongside an associate named Stephen Boyle, for a string of robberies and sentenced to 5.5 years. But what came next wasn't robbery. It was assassination. Salford, in the years leading up to 2015, was gripped by a brutal feud between organized crime factions. Broadly, a group known as the A-Team, and a splinter faction that had broken away from it after a nightclub brawl. At the center of the A-Team stood Paul Massey, 55 years old, a father of 5, a man known across Greater Manchester simply as Mr. Big. On the evening of July 26, 2015, Massey was outside his own home on Manchester Road in Clifton, Salford, when a gunman opened fire on him with an Uzi submachine gun, 18 rounds, fired at a man who threw his hands up and tried to dive behind some bins for cover. He was hit 5 times. He died within minutes, right outside his own front door. For nearly 3 years, the killing went unsolved. The shooter had vanished into the city like he'd never existed. 3 years later, on May 5th, 2018, John Kinsella, 53 years old, a martial arts expert and enforcer who'd once worked alongside Massey, well known enough in Liverpool's underworld, that footballer Steven Gerrard had reportedly called on him for help with a different gangland problem, was out walking his dogs near his home in Rainhill, Merseyside. His partner, Wendy Owen, who was pregnant at the time, was walking beside him. That's when the cyclist appeared. It was Mark Fellows. He shot Kinsella twice in the back with a revolver, then dismounted and fired 2 more rounds into the back of his head as he lay dying on the ground. Described in court later as a second cold-blooded execution, almost identical in method and nerve to the killing of Massey 3 years earlier. An associate named Stephen Boyle had acted as the lookout on both hits, watching the targets, confirming they were in place, ready to step in if anything went wrong. Fellows was finally arrested in June 2018 after a lengthy police investigation pieced together the connections between both killings. The case went to trial at Liverpool Crown Court. 7 weeks of evidence in front of armed police patrolling the corridors after both defendants had previously tried to force their way out of a courtroom in an earlier hearing. The jury deliberated for just over 31 hours. On January 16, 2019, they delivered their verdict. Fellows, guilty of both murders. Boyle, guilty of Kinsella's murder, but cleared of Massey's killing and of attempting to murder Wendy Owen. Witnesses in the courtroom said Fellows smiled and nodded as the guilty verdicts were read out. Boyle dropped his head, then gave a faint smile of his own. Mr. Justice William Davis handed Fellows a whole life order, the most severe sentence English law allows. No minimum term, no parole, no release, ever. At the time, it placed him among a group of fewer than 70 people in the entire country carrying that sentence. Fellows appealed a few months later, arguing the sentence was excessive. In July 2019, that appeal was rejected. You might assume a man capable of executing 2 people in cold blood would be untouchable inside prison. He wasn't. In February 2019, while held at HMP Whitemoor, Fellows was slashed by another inmate with a weapon believed to have been made from a razor blade. The injuries were serious enough that he had to be airlifted to hospital. Years later, in May 2023, by then transferred to HMP Wakefield, he was attacked again, stabbed in the back of the head and neck in the prison grounds. This time, the injuries were treated on site. No hospital trip required. Twice inside a Category A prison, the highest security level in the country, the man known as the Iceman had been hunted by other inmates. His reputation, it turned out, made him a target just as easily as it once made him feared. For a while, that seemed to be where Mark Fellows' story would stay. A double murderer, a whole life order, a name slowly fading from headlines as the years passed. Then, in November 2025, his name appeared in the news again, this time in connection with another prisoner's death inside HMP Wakefield. That part of the story involves 2 other men, a third murder victim, and a verdict that came down just days ago. It's a story on its own, and one worth telling properly, rather than rushing through here. For now, what's certain is this. Mark Fellows entered the British prison system as one of the country's most feared contract killers. Whatever happened to him after that, he never stopped being exactly that.